Hey there, welcome back to IST, and today we're going a deeper dive into the Raspberry Pi 4 that I played the old games on, the retro games on. I clicked the iCard in the corner to check that out, where I built it and then I demonstrated one of the many things that it can do, which is this thing called RetroPie, and where you can play retro games and all that stuff. So go check it out if you're interested in that. But we're going to go deeper into the Raspberry Pi 4 itself. What can it do? What are the specs? Like besides gaming, what can it do? And what it has, how to use it, all that stuff. And like I said, it's a computer that's really about this big. And for spec-wise, it has a Broadcom BCM. So Broadcom BCM 2711 CPU. And I don't even know what that means. I know it's a brand of integrated CPUs, I know that. But I'm just going to make it very simple and say that it's a quad-core CPU that's clocked at 1.5 gigahertz, which is pretty slow for that, but also you got to remember it's a very small PC, not powering much, so it's a very small computer, and you're not going to be doing much on it. You're not going to be doing very heavy loads on it, so there's really no point to having a very fast CPU. Now, on the 4, so there, Raspberry Pi 4. And when purchasing the Raspberry Pi 4, you have your choice of 2, 4, and 8 gigs of RAM. And depending on what you want to do, if you're doing very, very light loads like Word documents and just text files and just general light coding, then 2 gigabytes of RAM is more than enough for you. But if you're doing more database stuff or like just more of a normal computer experience, then 8 gigabytes is right for you. And it's clocks at 3200 megahertz. And like I said in my RAM video, click the iCard in the corner. The speed is very important. Is what it's clocked at is how fast data can travel through to and from it. And there's Wi-Fi. It's some of the newest Wi-Fi chip. And then there's Bluetooth. There's Wi-Fi, like I just said. There's gigabit Ethernet. Which is, gigabit is just a speed. It's running at a gigabit per second, which is very, very fast internet. And then Ethernet is just wired internet, like LAN, that blue cable. Now, ports on the Raspberry Pi, there are 2 USB type 2.0 and 2 USB type 3.0. Or not type 3, type 2, it's just USB 3 and 2. I wrote type because I have type C in my head, because there's also 1 USB type C port for power. So this is for power. Like a charger per se. And then also on there's a 3.5 millimeter audio jack, which can also be described as a headphone jack. because anything that you have on your phone or your computer that you plug headphones into is also called a 3.5 millimeter jack. And there's also a OpenGL graphics on board. And OpenGL is just a software that is used to display graphics, like there's also Vulkan and also just Windows Display Driver. And this is just a way to that the display is shown. And there's also a very important, a micro SD card slot. And this is for storage. And the reason why it's for storage is because there's no onboard storage. It's just how, so just say you want 8 gigabytes of internal storage, you grab an 8 gigabyte micro SD card, throw it in there, and install the operating system, which we will get to in a second. And there's no onboard storage. And I know that sounds weird, but trust me, it's there. I wouldn't be able to fit storage on there anyway unless storage just got really, really tiny. So it makes sense. And these are all the specs for the Raspberry Pi 4, which is the newest one, yes. So let's get right into cooling. Now, cooling this small computer is not very difficult, and there are multiple ways of doing it, specifically 2. There's a heatsink, and there's a heatsink. There's multiple combinations. There's heatsink plus fan, and then there's just fan. And then there's nothing at all. Now, having nothing as a cooling solution is probably the worst idea that you could have with this system, because overheating a CPU is terrible, meaning that, just say that, like I said, the CPU is the heart of the computer. If it breaks, then you break your PC, you can't use it anymore, and that's that. But having a fan alone is pretty nice because, you know what, I'm just going to draw it out to explain it a bit more. So we're going to do a cross section. So this is a cross section of the Raspberry Pi 4 case. Then we have the board here, any other jacks and stuff like that. And we're going to have the CPU right here. This is the CPU right here. We're going to draw it like that, just to make it a visual representation of it. So that's the CPU right there. And then there's a small gap of circles where the Raspberry Pi logo is, right? So you can have a fan up here at that vent. So this is a fan. Just say that's a fan. I know I'm not that good. So that's a fan, and then which is sucking air out of the case, and kind of sucking heat out of it with. Also, there are vents on the bottom here. There's like a mesh at the bottom where air would come up, and then the fan would take the air out. Or you can do this. You can do. So you can do, so we're going to draw the motherboard here again. Here's the CPU. You can also do a heatsink, which is a piece of metal that kind of looks like this. And what it does is it directs heat directly away from the CPU at the best of its abilities. And there's also a heatsink for the GPU the integrated graphics processor, which is right here, which is slightly smaller, but it's also there. Even in the fan configuration, even in just a fan, there's always, in the GPU, there's always a heatsink. Because that's one of the hardest working components. And having a fan with nothing for the CPU is kind of a weird decision, because what I did with mine, if you remember, is I did this one. I did the heatsink and fan combo. So that's a fan, and then we have the heatsink. And how a heatsink works is, yes, it directs heat away like I just said, but the reason why it looks like this, it's not just a block of metal, is because heat will rise. So the heat here, so I'm going to draw just a bigger scale of a heatsink, so let's just draw this right here. So this is a really up-close picture of a heatsink, not to scale, not to whatever, obviously, but this is just a visual representation. So this is the CPU. It's resting on the CPU, right? The CPU heats up, and then heat rises through the heatsink. And sorry if there's tools in the background. There's an office on the other side of this wall, and some students from the electrical shop are fixing up something so we can use our servers, which I probably will make a video on at some point, is our servers once we get that up and running. So subscribe if you're ready for that. And okay, so with the heatsink, heat goes through this, goes up through the fins, so it goes up through the fins, but then instead of just going up and out, it goes through the thinnest point, which is right here, and heat comes out. I'm not going to draw it for all 4 fins, I'm just going to draw it here, and then the heat escapes here, and then rises and comes out like that, but it's out of all 4 of these gaps here. And then, the fan will take it up and dispose of the heat properly, as a computer usually does. Now that we're done talking about hardware, now let's talk about software and how to actually access the stuff on the Raspberry. And this is just the basics, by the way. I will do a future video on going even more in depth on software. But let's start with something very basic. So let's start with the operating system. Or OS for short. Now, the operating system, when you buy a kit for it, when you buy a kit for the Raspberry, usually a kit includes everything you're going to need, like the Raspberry Pi itself, a case, maybe a keyboard and mouse depending on which one you get, and instruction manual, power cable, and a micro HDMI cable. And that's also what it includes. I completely forgot about the display out. Is a micro HDMI cable. It includes 2 of them, and it displays up to 4K. I completely forgot about that. That's probably one of the greatest parts about the Raspberry Pi 4. I don't know how I forgot about it, and I apologize for that. So the operating system. When you buy a kit, it comes with a SD card. It may come with a micro SD card that has a pre-installed piece of software on it called NOOBS. Why is it called NOOBS, you ask? I have no idea. I really don't. But this piece of software kind of looks like this when you first boot up the system, and it has a window inside of it and a list. This list right here is your operating system selection, so OS selection. So when you're connected to the internet, it will display a list of usually around 6 different types of operating system for you to use depending on what you're using it for. One that I suggest is, I think how you say it is Raspbian. And that's how you say it, Raspbian, but it's also known as the Raspberry Pi OS, which is its new name. But I think on the microSD card still it's called Raspbian. And these right here are the basic operating system that's closer to Windows, where you have a desktop and then you have a list of different applications to use and ways to use them and stuff like that. But there are other ones that I haven't really used before because I've only used the 2, which is RetroPie and Raspbian. So I haven't really used the other ones. I haven't looked into the other ones. Hopefully one day I will. And yeah. So enough about that. We're still talking about operating system, but we're going to go into Raspbian now. Now I'm going to show a picture of it on screen. This is what the desktop of Raspbian looks like. And as you can see, it does look similar to Windows in a way. And you may be asking yourself, what can you do on a Raspberry Pi? Well, very simple. There's quite a few things that you can do, but I'm going to list off a few of the basic ones right now. You can use it as a server for stuff like some of the IST freshmen at the moment are using it as a Minecraft server. You can use it as a database server. You can use it as a whole bunch of different types of servers. You can also create and run programs. Easily. Why, you ask? It's because Raspbian runs on Linux. And Linux is an open source operating system that's based on a command prompt. The basic version of Linux is based on a command prompt that's completely open source. You can do whatever you want with it. If you have the technical know-how, you can do it. So also you can do some light gaming, like very, very light gaming, like Flash games will work. Rest in peace, Flash, but not the DC superhero Flash, like Adobe Flash. Like light gaming, Flash games if you can find them. There's a version of Minecraft that's on there for some reason. And it's just, and then RetroPie, which is what I did before. Also, click the icon in the corner. Should have already appeared. Should have appeared earlier in the video. And you can also create / manage databases. Like I said when I was talking about the servers, you can create and manage databases because if you have a big enough SD card, you can just store a whole bunch of data onto it, and having 8 gigabytes of RAM, you can get that data very fast to the person, and then having it connected to Ethernet, and then just having it running in the background because it's just completely silent most of the time. You can just have a database right there in your home or your workspace and not have it take up that much space. It'll just take up an Ethernet port on the switch if you have it. And I'll make a video on Linux, and I'll make a video on networking eventually. And also you can use it as just a general office, use, like PowerPoint, Word, Excel, spreadsheets, Word documents, just stuff like that, just like basic, very basic text and picture display, because it doesn't have a very good graphics driver, so you can only use it for stuff like that. And then also, you can also just use it as a regular PC, because again, it does have a desktop and it does browse the internet, and if you can get the correct programs on it, then you can just literally just use it as a regular PC. There are no issues with that. And we actually use these down here at IT. Over here, we have quite a few of the Raspberry Pi 3s, which is the previous generation of Raspberry Pi, but the Raspberry Pi 4 wasn't around when all of them were ordered, so that's why we have it. But we have used, a lot of the students have used a Raspberry Pi before, so we might make another video on that. And it's also very, very cheap for the base set, which comes with, again, the case, SD card, the Raspberry Pi itself, some heat sinks, a fan, and the power cable and a display output cable, which is usually HDMI mini. Now, or not HDMI mini, micro HDMI, which is even smaller. My bad. And yeah, that's really about it. Raspberry Pi 4, everything that you need to know about it. That's it. Alright, so if you like this video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Follow us on all social media. We have Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, because we're a slave to trends. And I'll see you in the next one.